Hello and welcome everyone. It's great to see some familiar faces here and to welcome all of you to this first of several events today. I'm Jordan Stangarasa. I'm professor of history at the University of Victoria, and I also co-direct with a colleague at Queen's University, Audrey Kobayashi, the Past Drawings Future Choices project, which together with the NIKKEI National Museum, hi Sherry, hi Kay, is hosting these events here today. I want to respectfully acknowledge that the NIKKEI National Museum and Cultural Center is on the unceded territories of the Squamish Nation and the Hunkaminam speaking nations, whose ancestors have cared for this land for generations. I'm going to introduce our speakers today, and then I'm going to reappear again in the Q&A when you ask questions, and I may also moderate some questions to them before that if they don't end up occupying all of the space in their remarks. So two guests that I'm really excited to introduce who are working on a project that I think will eventually make a huge impact on Japanese-Canadian history here in, we get the door there maybe? Thanks. That I think will make a huge impact on Japanese-Canadian history. So the first is the author of that very impactful history, Professor Masumi Izumi, who is a professor of North American Studies. And are you still the head of Director of American Studies at Doshisha University in Kyoto, Japan? She's also a leader within the Past Drawings Future Choices project in a variety of different capacities, including as a very valued member of our governance board and one of the chairs of an archives cluster that's working to draw together materials on the uprooting, displacement, dispossession of people of Japanese descent in countries around the world. She's a wonderful scholar, Masumi is, who integrates social, political, and legal history in her work. She's the author of great work on Japanese Canadian history, including some work on Powell Street in the post-war era, and the author of a very important book, The Rise and Fall of America's Concentration Camp Law, which appeared in 2019 and looks at the law by which Japanese Americans were incarcerated and its history after the 1940s. Today we're talking about a book that she published just a year after that. It's very unusual for someone to have publications in 2019 and 2020, but Dr. Izumi did that in Japanese, on Japanese Canadian history. And that book, which I think will be the most sweeping treatment of Japanese Canadian history, or is the most sweeping history of Japanese Canadian history, and will be in English once it's published in English, is entitled The Japanese Canadian Movement. Yeah?
That's the title.
And it's currently in translation. So one of the people working on the translation to English is Emily Anderson, who is also going to be part of the conversation today. Emily's a curator at the Japanese American National Museum in Los Angeles. She earned her PhD in 2010 at UCLA and is the author of a book in 2014, which I presume was your dissertation, Emily, is that right? Yeah. Christianity in Modern Japan. She's a wonderful curator. I have a lot of admiration for Emily as a curator, including a marvelous exhibition entitled Don't Fence Me In, that looked at the experiences of young people in incarceration in the United States. And she's working on what I think is going to be a really exciting and delicious exhibition work on Japanese American food waste. Yeah. And she's working together with Masumi, an old friend and colleague, on the translation of the book. So we're going to start with Masumi recapping or summarizing for us some aspects of the book, and then we'll move into a discussion, a moderated discussion between Emily and Masumi, and then to a Q&A with all of you.
Thank you so much for the invitation, and also it's always great to have an excuse to come back to Canada, and I'm also I'm honored to be on this land, which is an unceded territory from the First Nations people. So I'm also very grateful that I have this chance to talk about my book, which is on Japanese Canadian history. And maybe I can start with, okay, so there is a handout in front, and please, yeah. If you don't have the handout, this is the table of contents translated into English. So this is the English version table of contents, and I still don't have the book contract because I haven't finished the translation. So so it's still tentative. But anyway, this is based on the chapters and subsections within the chapters from the Japanese version of my book. So the title is the Japanese Canadian Movement, and if you speak Japanese or read Japanese, the Japanese title is Nikkei Kanadajin no Ido to Undo. So Ido is migration and Undo is activism. And so movement is just like a wonderful word to capture both aspects of Japanese Canadian history, which is about migration and about activism. And as Jordan introduced, I did my own ethnographic work. It's mostly about post-war Japanese Canadian activism, like a reinvention of, I call it like reinvention or reclamation of Powell Street and recreation of the community festival and things like that. So I did a lot of those ethnographic work when I was a student at University of Victoria when I was doing my PhD degree. And also, I'm part of the Japanese scholars group, which like we do migration history, so Japanese emigration, and then I think I can like skip to this part, which is how I got to write this book. So some of you remember that in 2014 there was this movie, the Vancouver Asahi, that was premiered here first, and then it was released in Japan. And this Vancouver no Asahi, this is the story about the Vancouver Asahi baseball team, the Nisei pre-war Nisei baseball team. And when the Ishii Yuya, the director, he was creating this movie, I got like calls from some people, and also the NHK did the. Some of you might remember this too, that Hira Mikijiro, a famous actor, his mother was Nisei, I think. Yeah, so they did like this family history. That's like a series of TV program on famous people, but they have like a kind of surprising historical family stories. So Hira Mikijiro was one of this episode, and so like they did before they made this TV program, they called me because they had to find someone who is an kind of expert on Japanese Canadian history. So there are only like a handful of us in Japan. So and I happen to be one of them. So I got this kind of request around this time that like, is there a book that we can read that we can learn about Japanese Canadian history, like one book? And I'm like, no, because there is a book about Hiroshima immigrants, you know which one I'm talking about, right? Or there is a book on pre-war, like Ken Adachi's book, that's pre-war, and if post-war is a little bit. And then there is a book on women, there is a book on memories, there is a book on, different things. But there is no like one narrative that speaks from the beginning of the emigration up to 2014. So I thought, well, if there is not one, I guess I should write one. But it was challenging, and there were reasons that there was no book that narrates the whole history. And that's because, so challenges in writing a book on Japanese Canadian history. So because there is like a total kind of split between the pre-war history and the post-war history, because the pre-war history is mostly about migration. And it involves, and also it's the Issei time, the first generation, immigrant generation time. So a lot of the sources are in Japanese. That, if you want to write the kind of total history, then because most of the English language, like the scholarly work that use only English language sources, the Issei time is narrated through the Nisei's memory about their parents. And also there is like a kind of like a gap between the Issei time and Nisei time, because they speak different languages, and also because of the forced removal and internment, incarceration. The Issei didn't really, many of the Issei didn't really talk about the pre-war time. So, and on the Japanese side, there are like groups of scholars on Japanese emigration to different parts of the world. So, so disciplinary speaking too, there is a split. So in the Imin Kenkyu, like the migration history, a lot of geographers are involved, also historians. And looking at Japanese sources, and also other kind of sources, like why did people leave this particular village at this particular time? Because there was like a big flood, for example, like Shiga, Hikone, like that area. Many people came to Canada from that place, and the reason was because there was like a big flood that flooded and they couldn't farm anymore for like a couple of years. And so those kind of things we knew. So we knew that there were like Shiga produced the biggest number of immigrants to Canada, and the second was Wakayama, like Mio, because they lost this fishing right. Against the fishers in Kishiwada in Osaka, and there was this like a competition over the fishing ground, and then the Mio and Kishiwada fishers like kind of fought physically, fought against each other, and the Mio fishers won the physical fight, but they lost the legal court case, and therefore they lost the they lost the fishing rights. So now they had to find, and then Kunogihe came and became a pioneer. So we knew these stories, but then when we came here, and the Japanese Canadian scholars and also like the community, like in the post-war period. The work are mainly in English language sources, and the like a disciplinary and also academic interest was different. Like I found that for pre-war case, most of the time, like we are interested in what happened basically. So digging up like archival sources and maps and different things, and then the post-war period, as you probably have read many of these works, that there is a lot of kind of issues and interest on race issues and post-colonial studies, literature review, gender studies, and memories and trauma. And those are the issues that are that most of the scholars about post-war period write about Japanese Canadians in general are interested in and write about. So we have very different kind of political interest, also disciplinary interest, and there are there are like a few studies on the period after the war, after the internment, up to the 1970s. And that's the time period that I looked at. And so what was happening like before Powell Street Festival, but after the internment. So I was doing both archival work and ethnographic work. So Mayu-san is here, like she was like a major community, like an information provider for me, and I interviewed like many of the people who were involved in like an early period of Powell Street Festival, and people who were doing stuff before that. So so that was my own work that I've been doing since like early 2000s. And then, so there are like different issues that are there. And so it's difficult to actually write one story out of this, I found. Yeah, so like for me, like being bilingual scholar, also bicultural scholar, and then also being involved both in Japanese migration studies group and Japanese Canadian, more like activist and community based scholars, I thought, okay, I can put this together by this word movement, because then I can talk about migration in the pre-war period, and I can talk about activism in the second, like a post-war period. And so it's and yeah, so that's how I kind of solved this problem, and then I could put this together. So the pre-war study, I haven't done so much primary sources archival study, but I mostly rely on the secondary sources, like what other Japan-based scholars did. There is actually like a quite rich sources, secondary materials. But the thing is about Japanese scholars, like they don't, in the Imin Kenkyu anyway, they don't use so much like theoretical thing, like theoretical way of thinking or way of writing that is very dominant in North American academia. So I kind of had to still like reinterpret what the Japanese scholars are writing, because they are writing facts, like history or geography. And so I put that more into like, yeah, trans-Pacific or transnational kind of concept, and use like theories to explain this migration itself, because a lot of studies are like really localized study, like in Mio, or I mean Kaideima, or yeah, that kind of like Hiroshima. Yeah, so, and then for the post-war period, I wanted to add more factual, not just about memories, but actually what people were doing. So especially my work on the 50s and between the like early 50s and 70s, it's more like archival work, and also I did like yeah, ethnographic work. So I tried to put together, because there was a gap in between. Yeah, so that's how the book came together, and I think this part, yeah, this is what I already talked about. But I also, when I was writing the book, I also wanted to add, like, we were also finding people who were born in Canada and who got deported or exiled in Japan and didn't come back to Canada. So, so we and it's difficult to find them, because they're not like Japanese Canadians or Japanese Americans who belong to ethnic organization. When they're back, they're like former Japanese Canadians, and they're back, like kind of integrated back into Japanese communities. So it's hard to find them. They don't have an organization of ex-Japanese Canadians. Yeah. So it has to be done like one by one. Yeah. So we've been finding these people, and these people also, because of the change in Japan about the how to say, like before, people didn't want to talk that about their ancestors being an imin, like immigrants, and now it's like a good, like it's like something that they can talk about. So people were coming out while people were kind of quiet about this history. So so I knew a lot of people like here, the activists. So I have like each chapter. So this is a table of contents, so you can look at them. I'm not going to go through it, but each chapter has one person who I write the family or like individual history, and then I go into the explanation of this chapter. So the first chapter is Matsumiya Sotaro-san, and he was like a original Asahi player, and he was from Shiga, and I got to know the family, like descendants, his grandson and granddaughter. So I put his photo and his story. He went back to Japan like way before the war, so he's one of the early immigrants who made money here and then went back and became very successful, actually. And also, this page is, this is actually wartime chapter 5, but Ibuki-san, that's a family that like who lived here, and then so Ibuki-san's son was born in Vancouver and then grew up sort of like like very young years in Slocan, and then the family went back to went to Japan, and he stayed there, and now he's like a major contact person in Japan. So he has all these pictures of his family from pre-war time to like, yeah, to post-war time. So I incorporated a lot of these like personal family photos in there, and these are not in the archives. So that's also, I think, like that's a kind of a contribution. So I have like some major pictures that are already well known, but I also have like, this is like Slocan kindergarten picture that Ibuki-san gave me. And this is a post-war activism. So I have like Rick Shiomi, Tamio-san, and Mayu-san, and me. Yeah, so this is more like my friends from my research in the post-war period, like major activists, right, like Japanese Canadians. Yeah, so this is again back to the last chapter, chapter 10 is Vancouver Asahi story actually really helped to connect the Japanese side of the Vancouver Asahi story, which is mostly kept by the former Asahi players' descendants in Japan, but they don't know much about their ancestors' experience in Canada. So, but then they came, so sort of that movie helped us come together. So that in the middle, that's Matsumiya Satoshi-san, who is like the grandson of Matsumiya Sotojiro, who was like a big sponsor of Vancouver Asahi. And these people are now like retired, and they have a lot of time and they can do a lot of research. So they've been really wonderful doing their own research and archival research. And Matsumiya-san has read like all the Tairiku Nippo Asahi related articles. And he published a book actually about Asahi and Matsumiya Shoten on Power Street, like about Shiga merchants in Power Street. So we have these materials, and this is also in Kaideima. She is Kitagawa Hatsujiro, the first ace pitcher in Vancouver Asahi, and he's like an adopted daughter. And so we went to her house and then gave this medal from Canadian sports like baseball hall of fame, and we delivered to her house. So I have these kind of like not archived, like official pictures, and I really try to put those things in the narrative and also in the visual for the book to make it like personalize the story. So yeah, I think I'll wrap it up there, and then we can talk more about translation. But yeah, so this is the book. And the reason why I wanted to really explain this is it's not just translating language, but it's actually how to put this information together. You have to have some kind of like a transcultural and also trans-Pacific way of looking at this. Otherwise, it's kind of difficult to put the like write a comprehensive history of Japanese Canadians. So thank you.
Thank you, Masumi. I think for those of us working in the field, it's really exciting to have a work that will bridge all of those different content areas that Dr. Izumi is talking about and fill in those chapters, kind of pre-redress, post-war pre-redress era. Maybe we'll bring Emily in. I think Emily, because the floor is flat, we have to stand. So I know it's sort of, it feels, yeah, there we go. There's Emily. So
I only see a little bit better. Yeah, thanks for highlighting how short I am.
I want to maybe spring this on you and hopefully not steal from your presentation you're going to make as part of the panel, but you're part of translating from Japanese to English, but also an American-based curator. And so I guess, I don't know, I've moved somehow to ask you, coming from a Japanese-American history context, what's your experience been learning from Masumi's book about Japanese-Canadian history?
That's just such a simple question, Jordan. Thank you. Yeah, so I think how to put this succinctly as well. Thanks to knowing scholars, as he mentioned, so I did my PhD in Japanese history, actually. I started working at JANM ahead of that, but I left JANM thinking, I'm not doing Japanese American stuff, I'm gonna go do Japan. And then I discovered, as I started doing my own Japan research, that actually, if you look at the early 20th century, you really need to account for emigration out of Japan going out elsewhere. I worked on Japanese imperial, so Korea, Manchukuo, but then I realized there's a lot of people talking about Japanese immigrating to North America. So I had intended to leave JANM and America behind, and I got sucked right back in, which keeps happening. So when I was doing research, and so I'm more connected to a lot of scholars like Masumi in Japan who are Japan-based scholars who work on emigration. But through her, I got to know there's really like 2 other scholars who work on Canada. But there's a small group of people who work on North America. So I was aware of sort of the Canadian, that there obviously are war immigrants to Canada, but I didn't know very much. And so when I was able to participate in the Tomoshibi bus tour last year, a lot of the time I spent sort of thinking about like how, what are similar things, what are different things between the American and Canadian experience. And the 2 things that are identical are everything's organized around food. Food will pop up out of anywhere, just magically it appears, and everybody is related to everybody else. And if you're not literally related, you might as well be, because your grandparents came from the same village, or they played baseball together, or we even had 2 teachers in our group who discovered that they were related to each other. Their grandparents were siblings but had been estranged, and so they were looking at a photo in one of these sites, and we're like, that's my grandpa, that's my grandma, what do you mean? So literally, even if you don't know, you probably are related. But I think, so some of let me just talk about some of the things that are similar that Masumi already highlighted. I think that this issue of sort of the generational divide that is through cultural experience and also language is really big. And because I'm also forget I have a mic on, say knock it off. Because I also, like Masumi, can read the Japanese sources. I'm able to sort of access the Issei, sort of what Issei were writing and talking about, but just like in the US, this is the same and as in Canada, where a lot of that Issei experience has been sort of alienated from the descendants because there was a push for assimilation and language was associated with bad things or, withdrawing the wrong attention to yourself. And so the Nisei and subsequent generations went through a period of trying to avoid seeming too much like their parents or grandparents, right? And so you have a rift that developed between, and so like parents and children couldn't really communicate through nuance. You could do sort of, big ideas or like parents scolding children kind of communication, but when it came to understanding what your parents were doing or what they thought, that was, for a lot of people, that was something that was robbed of them, really, that they were not able to access. And so that's something that I feel like I see that same sort of gap and that same alienation across both communities, that the ancestral experience and what they were doing and thinking. And it wasn't, I mean, you know, there are people who, yes, they were farmers, but maybe they had wanted to be a student and to be a scholar. But they came here looking to be a student, didn't have enough money. Maybe they gambled away their money, common experience on both sides. And so they had great aspirations that they couldn't, you know, but then they had family and they had to give up their dreams. It didn't mean those dreams disappeared, but did the children know that those dreams ever existed? Usually not, because they just saw their parents as these sort of, you know, simple farmers. So it's things like that where it really, that language gap really sort of has stood in the way of giving sort of a fullness and a complexity to that immigrant generation. And I think you know, it's just because of the way disciplines work and fields work in academia. Like in the US case, people who work on Japanese American history train as Americanists. There's no language requirement. You don't have to learn a second language. But you know, there are like theoretical ways that people are trained in Asian American history to sort of to prepare you to look at this immigrant history and ethnic history. Those people who are required to learn Japanese are trained in Asian studies or area studies, and they have a very different perspective. So those of us who sort of sit in this in-between space, they're not very many, but it's growing, that sort of understand that just because a person leaves a country doesn't mean that they cut off that country and those people and those relationships and those memories, right? Just because a person came from Japan doesn't mean Japan ceases to exist. Just like when a person, your friend leaves for America or Canada doesn't mean that that person disappears from existence, that people continue to be connected across the ocean and that these networks continue to exist. And part of the work that we can do is to sort of rediscover those networks and the realities of human experience, right? Rather than letting these sort of national boundaries or language barriers separate us when we're not separated, in fact. So sorry, that was a lot longer than I meant to go, but you should have expected it.
Thanks, Emily. So Masumi, maybe I can ask you. I think we have to stand again.
Okay.
Yeah. Is it? I know it's kind of, you know, but
Yeah.
I think it's good.
You can ask the
I'll
question.
you. So, what's your sense of the reception of this work on Canada in Japan? And if not reception, or you know, because sometimes it's hard for us to know what the reception of our work has been. But to the extent that you know that, and or just more generally, how do you think? A Japanese-speaking or Japan-based audiences think about Japanese Canadian history or think about Nikkei abroad.
Thank you. One thing I can say is kind of like a shameful self-advertisement. But this book got an award, not both, the Pierre Savard Award for Canadian Studies from International Council of Canadian Studies. And this award, they have like 2 sections, and one is books about books in Canadian studies that were written in English and French. That's one category. And then books that are written in other languages other than English and French. And so this book got an award, which was very nice. I'm honored. But also, I was told that this book is the first book that got this award in Asia. So I like. Yeah, so I thought like, okay, how white can Canadian studies? Like so white. Yeah, because I'm sure like most of them are in European, scholarship. So that was one thing that, and also how rare it is to have a book in books other than in English or French or any European languages about Canada and also about Japanese Canadians. So that kind of also struck me that it is difficult to write this book in a way, but also the reception, I thought it would be like big bestseller, but it's not. But as I was saying, I would like to acknowledge Kawakami Sensei, Sachiko Kawakami. She is another one of the Japan-based scholar on Japanese Canadians. And also, there have been people who have translated works like Eric Sokugawa. He's like, yeah, you did that Power Gai Monogatari very long time, many decades ago. So, so there is kind of like a demand or like a hope that like I remember like you were saying that like Morita-san, who wrote Power Gai Monogatari, wanted his grandchildren to read his this. So you translated it into English, right? So there were like a lot of people want that. And another translation work that I did on Tulu Lake Stockade Diary. This is a Japanese American camp experience. So so this person was incarcerated inside Tulu Lake camp, which was also already a segregation center, but he was put in stockade for 3 months. And he kept, and he was a kibe, so he was writing in Japanese. And so the family kept all these handwritten diaries, but they couldn't read the diary. And I happened to like get to know them in 2013. And then, so I translated that only the stockade part, like he has like a whole camp diary. But anyway, that's 3 months of stockade diary I translated into English, and that's got more impact, I think, than the Japanese Canadian history. But yeah, so I think this work is important that for the community, I hope, and also for academic purposes as well. So I'm trying to claim that my book is on Japanese Canadian history, but it talks about migration. It talks about how the nation like sends out people, you know, for mainly economic reasons, and how there are different types of immigration, like in Japan's case, like there are government-sponsored immigration, and that happens to more kind of like a poorer community people, while Japanese Canadians came from like Shiga and Wakayama, and they didn't have any government sponsorship. They were like all community sponsorship, village sponsorship, family sponsorship. So they had more autonomy. And it's more about like when we talk to like Mio people or even like Shiga people, they are kind of emphasize the fact that they are more free from the government control in a way that it's actually like they broke free from the Japanese state, and they could like strategize, okay, we'll send one kid here and you know, keep another one here, and like there are a lot of those kind of like a back and forth strategic. We call it like a living space, or like a family space that's across the ocean, like Steveston Mio toka, Powell Street Shiga toka, yeah, those kind of things. So yeah, they do this kind of things. And about the reception, I think there is like kind of like a resurgence of or maybe the first time in the history of Japanese immigrants in Japan. Like Nikkei Amerikajin, there are like a drama made and movie made, and also stories that are like they're now interviewing like Nikkeijin everywhere. So yeah, and we kind of we can talk about why that is, but there is like interest. Yeah, so the Japanese Canadian story is still very little known, but I think like it's, the interest is coming back. So yeah, does that answer some of the?
Sure. So another thing that may have an impact on why there's been so little work done on Japanese Canadian history is that language is not just, translating from Japanese to English or English to Japanese, it's not just about the language difference. And languages aren't just, if you are multilingual, and many of you are, this is Canada, so many of you are multilingual, but it's like they're different. Like I have a different personality in Japanese than I do in English, right? I behave differently in one language. For like if I'm talking on the phone in Japanese, I do the whole bowing thing totally unconsciously. And so language, it's not just so. So what I'm trying to say is that there are all these, and the Issei were the people coming from Japan in that era. The joke is like if there are 4 Japanese immigrants in a place, there'd be 3 newspapers after about 2 weeks, right? These are people who were, most of them had at least a basic education, were basically literate, much higher literacy than in a lot of other places. And they published newspapers, they wrote newspapers, they argued through their newspapers, or always like in the opinion pages, there'd be one guy would say this, and then there were always competing newspapers that had different positions. And they were, poets and wrote short stories and all of this stuff, and they published all this material. And a lot of it still exists. However, they published it using a language that Japanese was in the middle of a major transformation in the Meiji period, which I won't go into because that's a whole other thing, but it's an evolving language. And also as immigrants come to a place and start to have to describe new experiences in their language, they start creating new words. And they're not the same words that we would use in Japanese now. So let me give you, this is not a Canadian, this is an American example, but it's a cute one. So I was reading something that an Issei I think in Washington State wrote, and they mentioned that in the people who grew cantaloupes, the fruit, would call them Kantaro-kun. Like Kantaro, like a boy's name, was how they'd refer to cantaloupes because it sounds similar. And so they would write it like Kantaro in kanji, like a person's name. And so but if you didn't know that, you'd be like, why are they talking about a person? I thought they were talking about growing fruit, right? But that's just one of like a gazillion, the Issei were very creative. There's kanji for every single town, every place name, all these different things. The katakana is different. There's a uniquely Japanese Canadian version of Japanese that doesn't exist elsewhere, even between the US and Canada, because there are different experiences, right? There's occupations that are more prominent one than the other. So the language, and also people were coming from totally diverse parts of Japan where their dialects were different and they didn't speak standardized Japanese. And so things would be expressed colloquially, written down. And so, and this is partly why this research is so exciting, because it's so much fun when you discover how creative and imaginative and playful people were with language. But you need to get an ear and sort of start thinking like an Issei to figure out a lot of these things. I mean, we've both probably spent hours what are they talking about? What is this place? What is going on here? But when you figure it out, you're like, oh. But it takes a lot of work. And so it's part of the challenge is that there need to be people who have the sensibility and sort of the awareness of the world of these Issei in order to understand what they're talking about and to get a sense of sort of the full expression of what that is, and then to, even explain it in the same language. It's not, you can't just quote from, these Issei's things and expect a Japanese person to understand it. I've done this with my mother, who's Japanese, who once said to me, oh, I didn't realize you could read Japanese. Very typical Japanese mom. But I've now shown her things where she's like, I have no idea what this is saying. I'm like, but I do. So yes, I do read Japanese, mom. So yes, I think and because there's, the Japanese Canadian population was smaller, and so it's this very rich archive, but it's accessible to an even smaller number of people. So that's part of the challenge, is to sort of dig out of this rich archive all of the experiences and stories and feelings and sentiments. It requires the right people, and it's very, those people aren't naturally trained in an academic setting. There isn't a discipline that is already sort of, and this is just the way academic institutions are. You join a department, you study fields, and you have to sort of want to do these things and create the program for yourself. And most people go into it not knowing that such a thing exists. So this is part of the challenge, is that we need more of these opportunities, connecting scholars with communities and getting a better sense of like how the community far exceeds what the limited imagination of academic departments sort of, provide.
Can I just add? Yeah, I just anecdotally again. So we went into this Kaidema, that village that sent like a lot of people were from came to Canada from Shiga, and we went there to visit that Kitagawa-san, but also Miyazaki-san, which is another like a prominent family in the Asahi history. And Miyazaki, so we talked to Miyazaki Yaeko-san, who was born in Vancouver, and then I think she was maybe like middle school when she was, I think she was in Slokan or somewhere, and then she, like that family was exiled to Shiga, and she had stayed there forever. So we went and we talked to her, and she was like narrating her like I don't know, time from Vancouver. She was old enough to remember the time in Vancouver. So she was like, 私ね、1937に生まれてね、and Dr. Miyazaki が私のこと取り上げてくれたのよ。And it's like, that's Nisei talk, right? Like exactly, that's how Nisei talk. And so she's living in this middle of Shiga, where you don't expect so many, English speakers. Yeah, but that's how she talked. And so we.
Wasn't even aware she was using
yeah. But the English, she doesn't say it with Japanese accent. She goes like 1937 に生まれてね. That's how she speaks, and that's how a lot of people here speak too. Yeah, and another thing that was that kind of threw us off was this wasn't surprising actually. We know that, but the Miyazaki, the manager of Asahi, is sometimes written Miyazaki Matsujiro, and sometimes written Miyazaki Ihachi. And we know that Matsujiro-san was, in the record, Ihachi-san's uncle. But then that didn't make sense because Matsujiro-san in the record is much older than Ihachi-san. But it looked like Matsujiro-san was the manager of the Asahi. So I'm like, what's going on? And we had to go through it, like Matsumiya-san actually had to go to the temple to find out this family relationship, and found out that Ihachi-san also used the name Matsujiro. Yeah. So and he preferred to use Matsujiro instead of Ihachi. So we have I Miyazaki in some documents and M Miyazaki in another document. So we had no idea, and we had to like find out later that Yaeko-san said that, oh yeah, my father's name was Ihachi, but he used Matsujiro. And we were like, don't do that, right? Because it's very but it apparently it happened quite like often that they would pick different names, and it throws us off. Yeah. Anyway, so yeah, that kind of things happen to challenging translation.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Wonderful. Well, thank you both very much, and maybe we'll open now for questions from the audience. We have another good 20 minutes. Yeah, please.
Question, just on your last anecdote. That person who's been in Japan now for 60 years, right? They're totally Japanese in their day-to-day living. But what prompted that to come out in their language?
I think it's because we asked her to talk about childhood. I don't know how she speaks in daily language, but we asked her to talk about like, so what was your father like? And she was talking about her mother had to sew all the Asahi uniform and stuff because her husband was into this thing, and it was like really making her life hard because so we asked those kind of things. So she's remembering, and then I think that's maybe prompted. Maybe she speaks like that every day. But I doubt it. So yeah, what do you think?
So half of my family, or some of our family, stayed, and I don't know too much about them because we haven't really had an opportunity to meet them or speak to them, and then they've since passed away, right? Since so many generations ago. the rest of the family came back after the war.
Oh, right.
So I'm part of that generation that's totally estranged from whatever happened
Yeah.
pre-war. And until the centennial and I guess the TV show Roots, which brought out more awareness and the pride back into the community, and then serving as JCCA president and the Human Rights Committee umbrella, and then with the movement to build the center here. That's how I got back into the community. But growing up, that heritage was denied. And I was telling my daughter coming here today that, that's where I came from. I'm used to the Nisei talk. I don't hear it anymore because everybody's gone. For a while, I was trying to do some research into that language, and then my interest went elsewhere, not in academia. But I don't know, like what that, or how, or why that would have triggered in her mind.
Right. Yeah.
It's interesting.
But Gordon Kadota was saying that when he took like fellow Niseis to Japan, and then he had to translate the Nikkei people speaking Japanese to the Japanese people. Yeah. Any other question?
Yeah, Vivian.
There aren't many people in this room who have the lived memory of the NIKKEI type of language that you're talking about, the Nisei language. I know Mary, Tasha, and I, and a couple of other people a few years ago started collecting what we call pidgin English. And it was exactly that type of Japanese. And then I was talking with Les, and we were going, yeah, that's how our parents spoke, that's how our grandparents spoke. And you're right. We still understand it. That's the Japanese that we understand. But when we talk to anybody who's from Japan, they laugh and they just go, that's really old-fashioned. It's not even really old-fashioned. It's really old-fashioned combined with English. But it is a very distinct type of Japanese that we understand. And we remember from childhood.
Thank you.
Some people are embarrassed by it. My father made a point of never mixing Japanese with English. And his friends who did that, they would inject ne at the end of the sentence. My father would be really embarrassed that Japanese was showing up in an English sentence.
Because your family moved to Toronto after the...
And one of the reasons my father was attracted to my mother was that she spoke good English. She was also pretty, but that was...
That's true. There was real conundrum, post 1949, and I think there's a big story to be told there about the experiences that the Japanese Canadians who were living here, and like our parents who were born here, what they were going through and their parents were going through. It was, it was a difficult time. Were they Japanese? Yes. Did they want to appear to be Japanese? No. They were trying so hard to be white, to be Canadian.
Can you talk a little bit, Masumi, about how you handled that period of history where you're making new contributions into the scholarship and you were conducting that original research? How do you understand those post-war decades between the 40s and the 70s?
Okay. So I think a lot of people kind of used to calling that period as a period of silence, like silent period, and it's true, but it's silent in academic work, but it's not necessarily silent when we actually dig up the primary sources. So there are things like Toronto Nikkeijin, like 30年史 or something. So 30-year of JCCA Toronto book in Japanese. And when I read that people are very active from 1940, 5, trying to bring people to Toronto and also dealing with this Issei. So like a major issue was like, should we include Issei in the JCCA, those kind of things. That seemed to be like an issue there, and then decide that okay, Issei should be part of the member, and then so those kind of things are written in this like a book on the 30-year like anniversary of. So I think, and also I think in this chapter it says Rikka and Japanese, Gordon Hirabayashi. So very few people know, but Gordon Hirabayashi migrated to Canada. And Americans don't know that. But yeah, so he was in Canada, but he was very active and trying to encourage people to get angry about the forced removal and incarceration, and and then he was writing for Rikka, this magazine. And we have like Roy Mickey's very early, like the 50s poems, Joy Koko's like 50s poems. And so, and also there are like articles about like a mercury poisoning in Japan, Minamata-byo, and that happened in Ontario as well. And they called like Irene Smith, Eugene Smith's wife. And then they brought like Minamata doctors to Ontario to deal with like Minamata disease in the indigenous community in Ontario. So there are these things going on, and there are like connections between Japanese Canadian activists and Japanese sometimes. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So there are these materials that are in, I think I found like Rikka in University of Alberta library. So I'm digging up, and then Mayu-san's, like Wakayama group stuff, and yeah. So there are actually a lot of things that that I could find that talked about this period, and that's kind of what I chronicled in that chapter. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Are there other questions from the group? Yeah. Please.
You were mentioning the Issei through the post-war. Were there many like Issei coming in after the post-war?
New immigrants, you mean?
Yeah, new immigrants. Mm-hmm. New immigrants in like the 50s and 60s.
Yes. So as Eric was saying, so people like 4,000 people were exiled from Canada to Japan, and we don't know how many like exactly, but about half of the people maybe came back, and then other people stayed. Like you said, that some families stayed in Shiga and others came back to Vancouver. So, and then the ban of coming back and also coming from Japan to Canada was opened, like lifted in like early 1950s. So then people, like some people really couldn't wait, and they came back like right away. But also the Canadian immigration law changed, and so the new immigrants, like totally unrelated to the pre-war immigration, and they came in the like about starting in like mid-1960s. So these people are very different because this is more like a point system. Like you have to speak English, you have to be educated, and have like skills that would benefit Canada. So earlier they posed like a pre-war, this like people who were here before the war. Some people came back, but then there is like more like a steady flow of new migration happened after 1960s, like mid-1960s. Yeah.
Yeah.
I had heard, and I don't know how true this was, that those people who signed the documents to return is not the word, to be deported to Japan they lost their Canadian citizenship.
Yes, yeah. So I think they could get it back. Yeah, they could get it back like after 1952. Is that right?
My family came back in '58, so by
Uh-huh.
then they would have gotten it back.
Yeah.
But I know they had to fight to get that.
Mhm.
So they had their Canadian citizenship reinstated,
I
then they returned, or
I
they
think
returned,
so.
and after that, this citizenship was returned, taken back to them.
No, they had their citizenship before coming.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, because new immigrants came like after the 60s, or in and after the 60s, yeah.
Canadian-born Japanese Canadians did not have their citizenship revoked. So naturalized citizens did. And so often young people had retained Canadian citizenship. And so they had a right of entry. Oftentimes their parents would need to apply as immigrants, including with sponsorship of children who may have returned before their parents. Yeah. Other questions? Yeah.
So it was interesting listening to Emily talking about translating the handwritten Japanese from the Issei. My grandfather, I have this document, part of it actually, but it was written prior to 1942 in his handwriting, and it's very difficult to find someone to actually like figure out what it says because of the old.
Japanese handwritten documents are the worst. And it's a uniquely modern, so early modern, so like Edo period, Tokugawa period documents are easier to read because there was a standardized way of simplifying, or like Kuzushiji, it's sort of like the cursive version. In the modern period, everybody decided to go all like free hippie on the writing. And I'm not kidding, like, yeah, it's crazy.
It seems like it is questions and answers, talking to the custodian maybe about, well, what if like, is it better if I sell my land now, like, or should I keep it, kind of thing? And they're saying, no, you should keep it, we're gonna take care of it. And it's a very, very interesting document. Like, this is the gist of it, but I don't really have a really good translation of it. So I don't know if you have suggestions on that.
I think we have a suggestion from the back row. Sherry Kajiwara, who's the director, curator of the museum.
As part of landscape industries, I have some authentic Japanese translators. So Dr. Eiichiro Kawa, who lives in Vancouver, his specialty was reading cursive pre-1942 and written documentation and architecture.
Oh, great. Thank you.
Thanks, Sherry. Other questions?
If I can go,
Yeah.
if I can go a little bit of a different trajectory, like the challenge of translating is we have like different readers and audience in Japan and in Canada. So you have to have like a certain set of primary, not primary sources, but secondary sources. And then, we don't have to have so much rigorous academic like secondary sources, literature review in Japanese publications. So that part, like if I just translate my Japanese book into English, and then Emily was like, you have to have like explain citizenship, like the concept of citizenship, and then so I have to add like a series of like all these academic work in Asian American studies on citizenship and things. So that's also another kind of different way that this is challenging.
And can you talk more about that? So, or both of you maybe. So, is it in addition to being in a different language, does it become a quite different book as it's translated for English? And what's the nature of the difference?
So for example, when your primary audience is going to be, I mean, obviously Japanese book, you're assuming your audience are Japanese. Even like people who aren't Japanese have been educated in enough Japanese that they will read it with that same framework. You know, you don't have to explain to them how like Japanese rural communities work necessarily, but you will have to explain to them, you know, how like British common law affects Canada, because they may not know that there's a relationship there that actually has legal ramifications in the Canadian setting. In the same way that in English, well, and you'd want it to be read by Canadians, but also not non-Canadians, right? So you still have to explain the different, you know, like American citizenship, because we've had this conversation, sort of like ongoing conversation about the difference between what citizenship bestows on Nisei in the US versus Nisei in British Columbia, because the laws are different. There's a constitution in the US that governs certain things, guarantees certain things that did not exist in the Canadian context in 1942. And then also, you can't assume your reader is going to know what rural like kinship networks in Japan were like in like 1895. So you also have to explain like a little bit about modern Japanese history, but then you need to also cite sources on, you know, all the different work that's been done. She can cite herself because she's the one who's written about it on like the legal stuff. So it's not just about language, like language requires that the listener has a shared understanding to a certain degree, right? So you lose that shared understanding that is assumed in one language when you switch to a different context. So that's some of the work too, is like once the translation work is done, like I went through looking at the chapters she had translated herself and then my own, and sort of thought through like, if I'm reading, like as a manuscript reviewer, for example, what do I need to see here for this to be a strong manuscript? Which, again, in Japanese academia functions very differently. Like she said, it's like basically a list of quotes from primary. It's all about, I discovered this primary source, quote. Then there was this. Then Nijima-jo had breakfast on this day. But there's no analysis. There's no explaining why this is significant, why this matters. Whereas and that's also more British. The British academic and German tends to be more that way. North American scholarship requires, puts a lot more emphasis on the analysis. So it's like, here's the quote, but let me tell you what it means. And this is why this is significant. And this adds our, you know, this adds to our understanding of, say, immigration because of this. So it requires, you know, writing for an entirely different audience in a totally different voice. So because the primary object is to make sure your audience understands what you're trying to say, right? So you have to serve the needs of your audience by making it user-friendly.
Mm-hmm. It's true. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I see a question in the back. Yeah, Larry.
This might be a little bit too much detail for the work that you produced, but it just tweaked on me. Quote from someone who's doing the costume design for Shogun, the new TV series. And she was talking about how she had to research, because even what we think kimono will be is a little bit different through history. Thinking, because now I see things on Facebook, hey, I found this. Does anyone know what this is used for? So I'm thinking of all the implications of things we take for granted, how you dress, what you eat, how you prepare food, what's the customs, so all that cultural stuff. Did you come across any of that where you had to go, oh, I never, like you had to, like you were saying, you always have to explain something, why this is meaningful or what they're referencing?
I mean, yeah, in general, that's often what needs, so like kimono is a great example. I think we collectively, I'm sort of generalizing here, but we often assume that kimono is sort of like this, an arrested, like a very specific thing that has always looked like this. But in Japan, kimono was fashion. So there's a difference between 1900, 1910, 1920s. There are colors that are popular. There are obi styles that are popular, right? And and there are people now, you see people wearing kimono now who are super fashionable, but it's very like, it's like very trendy. And it looks nothing like, and certainly nothing like what they wore in like 1592, whenever Shogun takes place, because that is an entirely different style of clothing. So yeah, so all of those things, and you know, that just like Japan was a totally different place in say 1895 than it was in 1935, but that difference, because that's the period I work on, so to me every year is like a really significant difference. But if you just sort of know that there was a place called Japan that my ancestors came from sometime before the war, and to me it's like, well, when before the war? 1895, 1900, 1908, all of these matter, right? So yeah, so all of those things, when you know that like somebody coming over in 1930 is or you know, that's becomes pretty hard. But if there's something where it's not going to be obvious unless they have that information. You want to provide that context because that will help explain so much of that, like what that person was experiencing hinges on all of those things, right? So yeah.
Any last questions? Okay. Well, we have a few things still coming before I thank Masumi and Emily. I want to just mention we're going to have, I guess starting at 4, there's going to be a reception with some food and drink, I think non-alcoholic drinks out here in the lobby. And at 4, Sherry Kajiwara will provide a bit of an introduction perhaps to there are 3 exhibition areas that you can go see. And she's going to maybe talk about all 3. I'll just mention the one upstairs. Even in the 15 minutes before there, you can head upstairs. If you haven't seen the exhibit upstairs, or it's in a way it's humble because it's just on the walls, right? So you can kind of walk by it without noticing. It's a really fantastic exhibition on Japanese Canadian history, including the internment era, but also beyond. And it's just if you spend time looking at the exhibit up there, I think that time will be rewarded, even if you're revisiting it. Again, it's got some wonderful facets. And then there's 2 more exhibitions, one pop-up and one temporary that Sherry will tell us about at 4 o'clock. So then, spend that time getting to know one another, mulling about, and so on, step outside, get a breath of fresh air. And then at 5 o'clock, we'll have this panel that you can see laid out in the main room or in the lobby room there, where Emily will appear again in the role of panelist and Masumi in the role of moderator. And we'll have a number of people who participated in past year field school and bus tour with the NIKKEI National Museum talking about that experience, and particularly what it means to bring together international perspectives on Japanese Canadian history. So I hope you'll stick around, enjoy the food and drink. Thank you both so much for the presentation. I think of Masumi and Emily too, both as people who bridge really difficult divides, both linguistically, like we've been talking about, and scholarly communities in Japan and North America, and increasingly Canada too, in the mix there. And so I think Masumi, as a scholar, is a person who bridges these divides, and in doing so fills in gaps between that migration history and the settlement experience here, between the pre-war and post-war, and sort of making that a connected, integrated history. So both as a person, you do that, I think, and I'm really excited for this book that's going to do that work. I think we really, want that book here in Canada. So keep going with the translation, and thank you all for joining us for this session.
Thank you very much.